Most sieges in history are decided by numbers. The side with more soldiers, more cannons, and more ships usually wins. But in the year 1565, on a small island in the Mediterranean Sea, numbers should have guaranteed only one outcome, and yet history took a different turn. An empire sent one of the largest invasion forces the Mediterranean had seen in generations, expecting a swift and decisive victory. Instead, it ran headfirst into one of the most stubborn and legendary defenses in military history. The island they came to conquer was Malta, and waiting for them was an order of warriors that had already spent centuries fighting on the front lines of civilization's great struggles, the Knights of St. John, also known as the Knights Hospitaller. What followed became known as the Great Siege of Malta, and for 4 brutal months, the fate of the Mediterranean hung in the balance. To understand why Malta mattered so much, you have to look at the world of the 16th century. At that time, one empire towered above all others, the Ottoman Empire. Stretching across 3 continents, it controlled lands from the Middle East to North Africa and deep into Europe. Ottoman armies had conquered kingdoms and crushed powerful enemies, while their fleets dominated the Eastern Mediterranean. At the center of this immense power stood one of the most formidable rulers of the era, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Under Suleiman's rule, the Ottoman Empire had reached the height of its power. Cities fell before his armies, trade routes bent under Ottoman influence, and rival states struggled to resist his expansion. Yet despite all of this power, one persistent enemy refused to disappear, a small order of warrior monks who had been fighting the Ottomans for generations. The Knights Hospitaller had once ruled the island fortress of Rhodes, where they had resisted Ottoman attacks for years. But in 1522, Suleiman personally led a massive campaign against them. After a brutal siege, the Knights were forced to surrender the island and leave their home behind. Homeless and scattered, they wandered Europe for several years until they were granted a new base in 1530 by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Their new home was the island of Malta. At first glance, Malta hardly seemed like a prize worth fighting over. The island was harsh and dry, its landscape dominated by rock and scrubland. Fresh water was limited, farmland was scarce, and the territory appeared poor compared to the great cities of the Mediterranean. But Malta possessed one priceless advantage: its location. Sitting between North Africa and Southern Europe, the island controlled important sea routes that connected the Eastern and Western Mediterranean. The Knights quickly realized the strategic potential of their new home. From Malta, they launched daring raids against Ottoman shipping, capturing vessels, freeing Christian slaves, and disrupting the empire's trade routes. These attacks embarrassed the Ottomans and threatened their naval dominance. What had once seemed like a minor outpost suddenly became a dangerous thorn in the empire's side. By the early 1560s, Suleiman had decided that Malta could no longer be tolerated. The island had to be crushed before it became an even greater threat. In the spring of 1565, the Ottoman Empire began assembling a massive invasion force. Warships gathered in the empire's ports, while thousands of soldiers boarded transports bound for the small island in the center of the Mediterranean. Estimates vary, but historians believe the Ottoman army may have numbered 30,000 to 40,000 men. Among them were the feared Janissaries, the elite infantry of the Ottoman Empire. These soldiers were highly trained, disciplined, and battle-hardened veterans of countless campaigns. Alongside them came experienced commanders, artillery crews, and skilled engineers capable of breaking even the strongest fortifications. Opposing this powerful army were barely 8,000 defenders across the entire island. Only about 500 of these were actual knights, while the rest consisted of Maltese militia, Spanish soldiers, and volunteers from other parts of Europe. Outnumbered several times over, and facing one of the most powerful military machines in the world, the defenders of Malta knew the odds were stacked heavily against them. Leading the defense was Grand Master Jean Périsseau de Valette, the head of the Knights of St. John. Valette was more than 70 years old, but age had not diminished his determination. He had spent decades fighting the Ottomans and pirates across the Mediterranean, and at one point, he had even been captured and forced to row as a galley slave. Few men alive understood the Ottoman war machine better than he did. Valette knew that Malta could not survive a quick and decisive assault. If the Ottomans captured the island rapidly, there would be little chance for outside help to arrive. But if the defenders could delay the invasion long enough, reinforcements from Spain might eventually come to their aid. With that in mind, Valette prepared the island to resist for as long as possible. When the Ottoman fleet finally appeared in May 1565, the sight must have been overwhelming. Hundreds of sails stretched across the horizon as the invasion force approached the island. Soon, thousands of Ottoman soldiers began landing on Malta's shores, establishing camps and preparing for the siege that was about to begin. The Ottoman commanders quickly identified the first objective, Fort St. Elmo. This small fortress guarded the entrance to Malta's Grand Harbor, making it a critical strategic position. If the Ottomans captured the fort, their fleet could safely enter the harbor and launch further attacks against the island's main defenses. However, Fort St. Elmo was also extremely vulnerable. It stood on a narrow peninsula, exposed to artillery fire from multiple directions. Many believed the fortress would fall quickly under Ottoman bombardment. Valette understood this risk, but he also understood the fort's importance. If St. Elmo could delay the Ottomans long enough, it would buy precious time for the rest of Malta's defenses to prepare. The siege of Fort St. Elmo began with an intense bombardment. Ottoman cannons fired day and night, smashing into the walls of the fortress. Stone shattered under the constant barrage, and clouds of dust filled the air as the fort slowly began to crumble. Despite the destruction, the defenders refused to surrender. Every time Ottoman soldiers attempted to storm the fort, they were met with fierce resistance. Arquebuses fired from the walls, while cannons blasted grape shot into the advancing ranks. The narrow approaches to the fortress became deadly killing grounds, where attackers fell in large numbers. Yet the defenders of St. Elmo understood that their survival was unlikely. The fortress could not hold forever against such overwhelming firepower. Their mission was not simply to survive, but to delay the Ottoman advance for as long as possible. For nearly a month, the battle raged. The Ottomans launched repeated assaults, and the defenders fought desperately to repel them. Both sides suffered heavy casualties as the struggle continued. During the siege, the Ottoman forces suffered an unexpected blow. One of their most famous commanders, the legendary corsair Dragut, was struck by cannon fire and mortally wounded. Dragut had been one of the most feared naval leaders in the Mediterranean, and his death dealt a serious blow to Ottoman morale. Finally, after weeks of relentless bombardment, the walls of Fort St. Elmo could no longer hold. In June 1565, Ottoman troops stormed the shattered remains of the fortress. The defenders fought to the very end, and when the battle was over, nearly the entire garrison had been killed. The Ottomans had won the fort, but the victory came at a shocking cost. Thousands of soldiers had died capturing a single small fortress. What was meant to be a quick opening victory had turned into a costly and exhausting battle. Yet the main defenses of Malta still remained. With Fort St. Elmo captured, the Ottomans turned their attention toward the fortified towns of Birgu and Sanglia, which formed the core of the island's defenses. Massive bombardments began once again as Ottoman cannons pounded the walls day after day. Inside the towns, the defenders prepared for the next phase of the siege. Knights fought alongside Maltese civilians, while women and children helped carry ammunition and supplies. The entire population became part of the defense effort. One of the most dangerous moments of the siege came when Ottoman troops attempted to land behind the defenses of Sanglia using boats. If they succeeded, they could attack the city from the rear and potentially break the defenders' lines. However, the defenders had anticipated such a move. Across the harbor stood Fort St. Angelo, the strongest fortress on Malta. Cannons from the fort opened fire on the approaching boats, smashing the Ottoman landing force before it could establish a foothold. As the summer dragged on, the siege became a brutal war of attrition. Food supplies dwindled, the wounded filled every available building, and exhaustion began to take its toll on both sides. Yet the Ottoman army continued launching assaults against the Maltese defenses. During one particularly fierce attack on Birgu, thousands of Janissaries stormed the walls and managed to breach parts of the city. For a brief moment, it seemed the defenders might finally collapse. Then, Grandmaster Valette himself entered the fight. The elderly commander took up a sword and joined the defenders in the streets, rallying his men as they launched a desperate counterattack. Inspired by their leader's courage, the defenders pushed the Ottomans back and sealed the breach. But by this point, both sides were reaching their limits. For months, the defenders had hoped for reinforcements from Europe. A relief army had been promised from Sicily, but week after week passed without news. Many began to fear that Malta had been abandoned. Then, in September 1565, sails appeared on the horizon. The long-awaited relief force had finally arrived. Spanish and Italian troops landed on Malta and advanced toward the Ottoman positions. After months of heavy losses and dwindling supplies, the Ottoman commanders realized the situation had become too dangerous to continue the siege. Reluctantly, the Ottoman army began to withdraw from the island. Their ships filled the harbor once more, but this time, they carried soldiers away from Malta rather than toward it. After 4 brutal months, the Great Siege of Malta had come to an end. Against overwhelming odds, the island had survived. The victory stunned Europe. For decades, the Ottoman Empire had seemed unstoppable. Yet Malta had proven that even the greatest empire could be resisted. The defenders had paid a terrible price. Thousands had died, and much of the island lay in ruins. Yet, their stand became one of the most famous defensive victories in history. In the years that followed, Grandmaster Valette ordered the construction of a new, fortified city overlooking the harbor, where the Ottoman fleet had once gathered. That city would be named Valletta, and its massive walls still stand today. They remain a reminder of the summer when a small island faced one of the most powerful empires in the world and refused to fall.